Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks To interview, where our guest today is Miranda, whose latest book, The Girl from Widow Hills, like her last book, The Last House Guest, are both Book Reporter Bets on selections. So I am so excited to have her here today. I've had the pleasure of interviewing her before at the Morristown Festival of Books a couple of years ago. In fact, I actually found those interview questions before, and I was like, wait, I remember doing this back in like 2017. So welcome. Again, so nice to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited we get to chat again. It's great.
Oh, it's like, now we can talk the new thriller. So on the cover of the advanced written copy of this book, there is this great line that said, "She was rescued, but she was never safe." Mm-hmm. And reading that line, which does not appear on the hardcover, it appears on my special edition over here, I thought it'd be a great way for you to pave the way for you to just tell us a little bit about what the book's about.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. So The Girl from Widow Hills is about a girl named Arden, and when she was a child, she was the center of this huge media story that really captured the nation's interest. So when she was 6 years old, she was swept away during a storm while she was sleepwalking, and she became trapped under the system of pipes under the town of Widow Hills. And there was a huge search and rescue operation that followed. It was highly publicized, and she became known in the media as the Girl from Widow Hills. The book actually begins as the 20-year anniversary is approaching. Arden actually changed her name to Olivia. She did not want to be part of this story. She didn't really remember it and didn't feel like she had ownership of it. So when she was old enough, she changed her name. She moved to a different state for a fresh start. But as the 20-year anniversary is approaching, she starts to feel like people are watching her, maybe she's been found, and she even starts sleepwalking again, which she hasn't done since she was a child. And then she wakes up one evening standing in her yard, and there's a dead body at her feet, and she realizes she's about to become the center of a story once more.
So she may not be able to hide again. She may not be able to hide. Well, you know, as I was reading this, I was thinking about the story of baby Jessica, who fell down the well in Midland, Texas. I forgot it was back in 1987. And this morning I found myself online looking for where is baby Jessica today. And I found a story that was done, I think it was by People magazine, about 30 years later, and where she was and the original footage of what was going on. And you realize that that would be something that would follow somebody. It's like, you know, you are baby Jessica. Did you have any particular story in mind when you started writing this book? What was the kernel of the idea?
Yeah, so that was one of them. There were actually several that kind of, they sit in your mind for a while, and then all of a sudden something triggers it where you're like, oh, wait, this is the book I want to be writing. And it's funny you mentioned baby Jessica because, and this was years ago, but I must have seen something in the news that was, maybe it was the 20 or 25-year anniversary, and they said the name and I just could remember it in an instant. And I was a child when it happened. So I don't really have a strong recollection of the actual event, but I remember the story and I thought, wow, 20, 25, 30 years later, you're still sort of, you say that name and you remember. And that kind of sat in the back of my mind for a while. I think one of the themes I'm really drawn to is in a lot of my thrillers is whether you can become somebody new or whether the past really influences who you become. And this takes it in a very literal way. But it was actually during a few years ago, during the Thai cave rescue, where I really felt like I was experiencing that as an adult and following the case. And I really remembered how invested I was and everyone around me was in that story and watching it, and how the media and the audience kind of fed off one another, and you're looking for more and more and more information. And more than anything, I remember that feeling when they were found after so long. I was actually at my cousin's wedding, and my whole family were together, and we were like texting each other during the rescue. It's sort of, it really captured everybody. And so those were kind of the two things I was thinking about. And then I really start with character before plot. And so I was thinking about specifically a character who didn't want to be a part of a story like this. And that was the kernel of where this came from.
Yeah. And, and you think about the person that you're thrust into this. She was young. So, she doesn't remember most of what was going on during that time. It's kind of funny watching the baby Jessica story. Her husband, when he first started dating her, did not know she was baby Jessica. Like, he didn't know, everybody else knew. It's like this crazy thing, but she changes her name. She tries to disappear. She wants to hide. Did you find that that victims of something that like this, do they want to usually hide, or what's the story? Like, do they want to be known or not?
I'm not sure. So I like to, obviously I research the cases to kind of remember what the media was like
Mhm.
around it, but I really like to build a character completely from scratch and not to base it on somebody real. And so I just try to connect to an emotion. And this was the character in this story. It was a very traumatic event for her. And so she really never felt like she had ownership of this, either because she didn't remember. She was 6 years old when it happened, and it was very traumatic. And either because she didn't want to remember, or because it was buried under these layers of trauma, she wanted to become somebody new and not to be known as the girl from Widow Hills. But I didn't really kind of look into specific cases in the
Mm.
past and how they navigated from there. I was more interested in building this character from scratch.
Well, you definitely built a wonderful character, but I have to tell you also that I was going to name, if I had a daughter, she was going to be Arden Alexandra. That was going to be her name.
I,
So I love the choice of the name Alexandra. And when she changed it, I was like, no, 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 it's a great name. Stick with the other name. But
I
I
love
could,
the name Arden too. It's
I
one of
really
my,
loved it.
yeah.
But it was funny because we lived on Arden Court, and my husband goes, "Is that the tie-in?" I go, "No, I just really like the name." So it was even funnier because when my second son was born, we knew we didn't want to have another child, and I couldn't come up with the middle name, and I was really stressing this. And my husband goes, "Alexander, it's done." I was like, "Okay, I've got it completely here."
Yeah.
So when you're coming up with character names, is there anything that you like? Do you go to phone books, obituaries, baby name books? What do you do to find names for characters?
So a little bit of everything. The backstory is I have a very large extended family. And so I try not to use any names in our family. And then I always end up doing it inevitably. Like the book comes out and one of my cousins is like, "Hey, I'm in it." And I'm like, "Oh no, what have I done?" And I also taught high school. And so because of that, I think I'm gravitated towards names that are not as common because I'm looking for somebody that I don't have a previous relationship with. And I do gravitate towards names that I really like as well. And specifically for Arden, I thought that was going to be her name kind of throughout the book before I started. But I realized, the name had to be something very memorable.
Mhm.
Um, that if somebody heard the name Arden Maynor, they would say, that rings a bell.
Yeah.
Or is that the girl from Widow Hills? And that's why it became her name in the past. And then she changed her name to her middle name going forward. But I do kind of look through baby name books to kind of just to break things up, because I feel like I'm gravitated just towards certain types of names. So I do.
I also heard somebody was saying that they use high school yearbooks, but for different periods of time, because names that were popular in the 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, are not as popular now. So you might have had a lot of Nancy. So if you're writing a period central kind of book, you actually want to make sure you're getting the name that's something
Right.
germane. I mean, I joked today that there are a lot of children who will not have bicycle license plates because they don't have common names. And a friend years ago named their child Caden, and somebody said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Won't have a bicycle license plate." That's basically what it comes down to, custom plate, So you know that when something like a tragedy happens, people who are close to the story, they want to insulate themselves into the story. They want to be part of the story. So what you first have is this crowd, the whole people in the town that want to be part of it, of what's going on. But then you also start to attract other people as time goes on who want to insulate themselves and to insert themselves in as well. It's a different kind of fame. It's a fame where it's got a lot of not all positives to it. There's a lot of negatives that go on as well. Were you thinking about that as you were initially writing the book, or did that come as you were writing?
I'd say I was thinking about it when I started, especially because you write thrillers and suspense. And so because of that, I'm always sort of trying to imagine what could go wrong, or
Mhm.
what's sort of the extreme something could be taken to. And so those are usually in my mind. But I had, the core group who rescued her, and everyone with the best intentions, and everybody sort of cheering her on. But then I thought about for her what it would be like maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, where they want to hear from her. They want to know she's okay. And what if she doesn't want to give that part of herself away? Do people believe that they're owed that part of you because they were a part of your story. And so I was kind of thinking about like, what are the different extremes? How could people react? And try to piece all those possibilities into the story, and especially kind of how she perceives herself and the people who are following her case.
Yeah, and you know what it is, because the spotlight gets turned on and they have no media training. These people are just talking. They're just ordinary people who all of a sudden become, put into the spotlight. And there's such a dark side too. Besides the fan and fan letters, they're the creeps and the people who are trying to figure out like, oh, did you get money? Oh, I want a part of it. I want a part of what's going on. And they insinuate themselves into your life. And I think she was seeing that, whereas her mom was writing a book about this and decided to make herself famous for what happened as well. And there was a real difference between the two personalities and how they looked at the same tragedy.
Yeah, and then I think to realize that your story is woven together, and that they both have a side to the story. There's the mother waiting for her daughter to be rescued, and there's the daughter who went through it. And what happens if one wants to share that story? And she wants her daughter to be part of this kind of media experience afterwards, and then you have somebody who's growing up in it who really doesn't want to and shuns it, and that contrast and push and pull adds even more tension to the situation.
And you definitely ramped up the tension. I mean, you are becoming like a one sit read, like one of those, if I start, I'm like, I am in so much trouble. I am in so much trouble because I'm not going to stop reading and I have everything else I'm supposed to be doing. But it definitely, and I noticed with each book, you're getting even tighter on writing the suspense and the thriller action. So just know that's not, that's not going unnoticed by me.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally there. Did you research sleepwalking? I have a friend who actually does this. And she said the first time she was with her now husband and she got out of bed and started walking, he was like, what are you doing? And she said, it's so odd when you have somebody who does this because it's totally scary. You could leave the house and just, go out about your business.
Right. I did. So I researched not only sleepwalking, but lots of different parasomnias, I've read a lot of firsthand accounts of people who'd experienced different types of sleepwalking. And when I started telling people about the book or the book idea, I kind of came up with a sleepwalking angle to it because I was thinking about these big cases and what makes a story like this sensational. And it's almost like you can imagine how that could happen, that it's out of your control too. And when I started talking about this element to different people, I was so surprised that almost everybody had a story, not necessarily sleepwalking, but a sleep-related story, or they knew somebody who was a sleepwalker, or their child had done it once, or they had a story. And I realized, okay, there's something kind of universal about kind of tapping into that fear of like, what happens when our consciousness is away, when we're sleeping? What are the different possibilities? And so I felt like there was something kind of universal to that. And it's a lot more common than I had thought before I started researching, especially in children.
Yeah, they just start wandering around the house. I mean, I had friends when they were little and they said, no, they can't have sleepovers because you don't know where they're going to end up. And they said they might walk home. And I was like, really? I never even thought about that.
And all the hidden dangers to that, walking outside your house or hurting yourself, on something in your room even. Yeah.
Well, even like the way she bought the hook and eye to lock her door so that she would have to do an action. I think she thought that action might wake her up. Right. So, as she was sitting there, it was, and there were all these things that like, how could you deter yourself from doing that? Do you put something on the floor? What do you do to wake yourself up?
Right. And she lives alone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You live alone. You're like, all of a sudden out in the forest with a dead body, that's not exactly what you plan to do.
Yeah.
You've often said that in thrillers, there's no luxury of time. Morality is put to the test. It's the characters have to act on instinct, and you're fascinated about what that means. So let's talk about what happened with Olivia in this story. What challenges does that give you as a writer to have that, you're up against this challenge right now?
Yeah, like this challenge of time and what she's coming face to face with. She sort of has, when I was thinking about her story, she has kind of the internal net closing in and also the external one. I mean, there's this fear in her mind that she still wants to remain hidden. She doesn't want to be known as the girl from Widow Hills. And especially as, if she reveals that, then people will know she was a sleepwalker and she's the one who found this body in the yard. And they're going to kind of put two and two together and wonder if she has something to do with it. But then also, externally, this investigation is kind of closing in on her at the same time. And so she's trying to balance these two things at once. What's the right thing to do? What's the trade-off? Do you trade? Do you reveal who you are in order to defend yourself or to explain yourself? And so she's always kind of walking this line of trying to not lie, but not reveal everything. And I think, her decision of what she thinks is the right thing to do is maybe different from what someone else would decide based on her entire experiences. And every time something's happening, she feels people watching, or as the investigation itself is closing in, she has to make these really split-second decisions, and with every piece that she discovers too.
And what I find is that she doesn't want to be friends with people, but she tries to be friends with people. And every single time, I feel like she was testing herself.
Yes.
She was testing herself to say, would this be something that I'd be comfortable with? And it's almost like you feel like she's sitting in the bar having a drink. And it's like, am I still okay being here? Should I leave? Should I stay? And you saw that whole internal, what's going on in her head. Do I want to be friends with this person? What is this person looking for from me? What do they know about me? What don't they know about me? So I find that I was inside her head so well with you, because you were just sitting there saying, I don't know what she should do either. I mean, I don't know what she should get up off that bar stool and go home either. I'm not quite sure,
Thank you. And, I was thinking a lot about, I think she wants to have strong connections, but because she is not able to share, or she doesn't want to share who she was, it's almost creating limitations for her in making those connections, because she can't expect people to give that to her when she's not giving it in return. And she's kind of constantly walking that line and deciding who can she trust based on what she knew in the past and how she was treated in high school when people found out, or in college, or from people who were writing letters to her. What do they want of her? Do they want her because, are they interested in being a friend to her because of who she is, or what they know of her in the past? And that's like another layer she's constantly having to wrestle with.
And she does have this boyfriend from the past that she's left, and he keeps every once in a while coming back, and you're wondering, where's he in this whole story? Where's he? What has he done to her head already all this time? And a lot of this is an internal head game of what's going on with her that the reader's getting to follow. Yet we really are in her head the whole time, because it's not like we see the other characters. We only see everybody through her. And I thought that was such an interesting way to be telling the story, because it's not like there's another character just saying something. It's always talking to her and back with her.
Yeah, all of my adult suspense, I write in first person from one character's point of view. And I'm really drawn to that, I think, because I think of the character arc and that journey before story. And, I think even if I haven't had the experience, I've never sleepwalked, I've never, been the center of this huge media story. If I can connect to an emotion authentically, then I feel like I can write the character and their journey authentically. And so that's kind of how I'm comfortable writing a story and then filtering everything through that perspective. And when I start, I don't know what happened. I don't know who did it. And so I feel like I can write that authentically, or she's not sure who to trust. And I'm not sure who to trust in the first draft either, because I'm kind of figuring it out as I go.
I'm not sure which character I'm going to be saying, wait, do I want to be dating him? Not sure. Do I want to go to the bar? Not sure. And I'm sure as you're writing, you're weighing each thing. If she does that, it means this. If she doesn't do this, it means that. If she's in the parking lot alone, what could happen? So that first person narrative definitely does it. The book is also punctuated with transcripts from interviews that give the reader's perspective on what happened in the original accident. Were those written at the beginning, or did you insert those later on? Because it gives you this little backstory in little pieces throughout the book.
So I started doing them when I was about 50 pages in. I was writing my first draft and thinking about how could I really show what this was like without, just saying it in a couple paragraphs, that this had happened in the past, or giving too much information that slows down the momentum. So I had the idea to actually show it based on these transcripts from the media transcripts from when she was missing, and the weather reports, and the interviews with the people involved. And that kind of took on an arc of its own. Mm-hmm. And they were sort of pieced together at the same time as I was writing it. And sometimes deciding where they would go would help me figure out what shape the story was taking too. So yeah, I really enjoyed writing this. It was the first time I had done something like that. But I felt like it really helped continue the forward momentum while giving you the backstory without kind of bogging down the story and backstory.
I felt that too. And I felt that they propelled the story along. They didn't drag it down, but they punctuated as well, because it'd be that moment that you needed that fact.
Mhm.
You needed that kind of backstory to understand what was going on, to move it along. But you can also move along more briskly without having to like explain every single thing. And I felt the same way about the voicemail transcripts later on, because they saved a lot of action. There was one page where there were like 4 or 5 of them on a page, and you realize that you didn't need to have dialogue with each of those people. If it was just presented like that. And I felt when we're living in a time of text and instant message, and it's very, you don't need the whole story. You just need briskly of what you're going on. And I thought it was something that really kept, again, moving the story. Was that something that you were thinking about too? Of like, I don't need 5 pages to describe this. It's this.
Well, I wasn't necessarily thinking that with the voicemails, but I was trying to think about, there are things in the past, and then there are things still happening in the present, and all these things are still chasing her. So I was trying to think about what is the element chasing her. And so in the first half of the book, it's the story of what happened there. It's the sleepwalking interviews. And then in the second half, there are these, she misses them all. And there's this group, it's the doctor calling her, it's the detective calling her, it's a lawyer calling her. And so there's still these elements that are chasing her. That was my thinking when I was doing it.
Yeah, well, believe me, as you're sitting there looking, like, wait a second, all these people are looking at her for different reasons.
Right.
They're all looking, but she has got to feel like caged at this point, because everybody's coming after her, and her head is in each of, I think there were 5 that were on the page. When I sat there, every single one of them could have sent her in a different direction. Everyone, you're guilty. I want to help you. You didn't take your med. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. And every single one of them could spin the story differently. I also love this quote. You could hold 2 versions of the truth and yourself in your hand at the same time, and both could be completely real. And it was a line I used to end one of the chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that is exactly what this woman's doing. There's the old her, there's the new her. Both of them are real, but which one does she want to have? What does she want to be doing?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by perspective. That's another theme I'm drawn to, I think, in a lot of my books, is not only how much of our identity is formed based on how others perceive us, or how we know others perceive us, versus how we perceive ourselves. And, they're both real versions, just from different perspectives. And so I think in this book, it really is, I think I took all the themes I was interested in and did it very literally this time, with, the past versus the present. And these 2 people, I mean, she has 2 different names, and she's known in 2 different ways. And having to come to terms with, which am I, can both be true, but show different sides of me.
Yeah, and there's this other line as well. People tend to fill in the blanks however they want. It was not my job to correct them. So there were different things. And I think these days, opinions of people are formed in snap moments based on social media and images and things like that. And I think that she's saying, you saw me, you saw what you thought. If you didn't see what I wanted you to see, I'm not going to sit there and help you figure it out. If you think I'm Arden from the past, I'm not going to explain it. If you think who I am now, I'm not going to tell you who I am. Yeah. And I think there was such a strong sense of not understanding self and understanding self. She was doing both at the same time. She knew what she wanted, but she wasn't quite sure how to get there in a lot of different situations. She really didn't want to be single anymore. She'd like to be with someone, but there was this totally untrusting side of her, because I don't know who I could be with, and I don't know who I could be safe with. And I think it was all coming back to being safe because of that one period of time where she wasn't safe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that was, for me, the character arc that I wanted to explore when I was starting this book with her. Definitely. Love that.
I was like, So you definitely had me like from the go. And notice, everybody, we're not talking about plot at all, because I am not going to give away. There's so much I could be giving away here right now, and I am holding myself back. I would ask her so many more questions, but no, you have to go read the book first. The other thing is, Rebecca Ross has narrated your last 4 adult titles. I went and looked up that today, because we're going to include an audio excerpt at the end of the podcast. Have you ever spoken with her? Have you ever had conversations about the books, the way you see the characters, before she does your audio?
We have not spoken directly, other than through social media, but I absolutely adore her narration of the books, and I'm so excited that she's doing this one as well. Yeah.
It's great. Like a common thread. It's like this common thread of your books is that there's the same narrator besides the same writer. And I don't know if that happens all the time. I've known, there's certain authors there's certain thriller authors where there's certain people that have done it. It's like a Scott Brick or, but this is the first time it just said, wait, she did all 4 books when I was researching this morning. I said, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you ever read your book aloud to hear if there are repetitive words, if there's anything in the storyline that's like, the words are just not making sense? Because with audio becoming so big these days, it's sometimes a phrase will not read well. It'll read one way, but be heard a different way. Do you do that, or is it something that's not in your psyche to do?
I do. I don't necessarily do the entire book, but especially when I'm editing, I do. The flow is really important to me as a writer. And so I do read it, especially it helps me pick up on errors or, things I don't notice when I'm reading. So I do, but I'll do it, maybe not like the whole book, but I'll do, okay, this chapter and maybe a different chapter, a different day. So it's not like I can anticipate what's coming. It's more just reading sections for flow and making sure there are no errors. And
it's also you're reading every word at that point, because a lot of times, I read very quickly, and I can't say that I read every word. I read in chunks, like as I'm sitting and reading. And as a result, I think that sometimes you'll see an extraneous word, but you won't see it the same way as you'll hear it. And sometimes when you're listening to narration, I'm like, oh, this is like not great. It's just, it's not flowing as smoothly. And I'm just always curious with authors, do they actually pay attention to that?
So. I do. And I was my daughter was helping me record. I was reading a first chapter to post later. And it was funny because like the first time you do it, I was actually doing it for a previous book. And it was the first time I had done it in like 4 years. It was for All the Missing Girls. Right. And it was so different than how I would just read it. To kind of experience that again had been a long time. And it's different. It's a different experience. And I never have everybody read during these interviews because I think it puts you on the spot, because you have to be a little bit theatrical. You just read the way you'd normally be reading on a page. There's got to be emphasis. And I think that sometimes people say, well, I'm going to read this chapter and I'm going to read this because it's practiced. It's exactly like, this is how I'm going to do it. This is where I want to end people on a cliffhanger or whatever. So, yeah. So the last house guest was a Reese Witherspoon book club selection. So tell us what that was like, because I remember seeing that news and saying, okay, this is really pretty cool. It was incredible. It was absolutely beyond my wildest dreams. One of the things I really just love about her book club is the different types of books that she picks month to month. And so what I found was that, a lot of people who maybe wouldn't be gravitating toward a suspense or a thriller for their book club choices were picking The Last House Guest. And I love chatting with book clubs. So it was wonderful because I was able to kind of connect with all these different book clubs. I'm still Skyping with them or Zooming with them now. It's been amazing experience. Yes. And I think that also you can get a lot back from a book club as well, because sometimes people say that they've seen things in their writing that they didn't see. They'll see a character, they'll see something and they're like, wait a second, that was on the page. How did you take that away? And I think it's such a good experience for an author to be able to connect with readers like that and hear, oh, I got that part of the suspense, or even just see if they missed something. Because I think that sometimes it's like, well, I thought that was completely apparent and it wasn't. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think everyone brings something different to what they're reading. There's this element that the reader brings that's different for every person. And that's why I love book clubs. Like, I feel everyone sees something different. And there have been times where I'm like, you might be right. They're like, well, I'm sure this character knew that. And I'm like, I think you're probably right, but I wasn't thinking that. I wasn't seeing it at the time. And that book was the perfect setting too. It was the beach town. It was just the greatest location, and and the twist at the end, which we're not going to share either, but the twist at the end there, it was something you really felt could happen. And you also felt like the person who was the have and the have not, the person who's there all the time. I think everybody can relate to that part of that story as well. So good discussions. So you were a high school science teacher. So how has that helped you in pandemic homeschooling? Has that helped you at all? Because I have to say that if I was pandemic homeschooling, we would be having library, probably go outside a lot. We'd have a quiet reading time, maybe some more reading, and we'd skip math and science because that just wouldn't be it. Maybe they could count the money in my wallet or something like that. There's nothing else that would happen. So did it help? Well, what I realized is that my teaching background did not make my kids interested in learning from me. Like, that did not happen. I think we're very fortunate that they're in middle school, so we're old enough to kind of be self-sufficient, and their school was wonderful in being able to convert to virtual learning
Mhm.
pretty quickly. So, they obviously needed help with technology things and as we were doing projects, but they were old enough to kind of get what they needed from their teachers and educators still. And I'm very thankful for that. And I was more overseeing, okay, are you in class right now when you're supposed to be? Someone, yeah.
Are you in class at 9 o'clock in the morning? Have you managed to sit yourself down in your chair? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was funny because people would have such different experiences about what would happen with their children and with the learning experience. And I had this line that I put up and said that I was just thinking that anybody with older children would always say, "Oh, I wish they were still little." No one said that the last 3 months. No one said, "Gee, I wish they were still really young." Not at all.
I think it must be so difficult to have to oversee the education and, try to balance what you're doing at home too when you're used to having them at school. Yeah.
Yes, like, Mom, you can't right now. I need the laptop.
Right.
I have the laptop to do my spelling homework.
Right.
Completely different thing. So your typical writing schedule, I remember, used to be between 9 and 3,
Yeah.
and that was when the kids were at school. Did
Yeah.
that have to change over the last couple of months? Yeah.
It did. It's changed. I kind of gave up trying to cling to that because it wasn't working out. And so I had to figure out what routine worked for this. And so I find that I'm writing in smaller chunks, more spread out. And
Mhm.
that's what's working now. And, now we're on summer break. So, but that way they didn't feel bad knocking on the door when they had an issue. And, I think with writing, it's hard sometimes because you want to get deep into the story.
Mhm.
So I would, instead of kind of wrestling with dual responsibilities, I would just set different times. And I would get up a little earlier and listen to music and think about the scenes I was going to be writing and try to get a scene written early so I could help out throughout the day and maybe do things that weren't writing first draft, but still work related, but not where I needed to be kind of deep in that headspace while they were needing assistance sometimes.
Yeah, can you actually do notes? Like I know people sit down to write the first draft, but if you're making dinner, if you're dealing with the kids and you see something, can you just write yourself a note on a piece of paper and say, "I want that later on," or can you really just say, "This is writing time. This is turning on, turning off"?
I do make notes. I actually, and I've always had this, I've had like the notes app in my phone and I'll be like, I got an interesting line and I'll write it down. But the problem is then I get to the computer the next day and I'm like, I have no idea what this was about. But I do sometimes make like a little outline of the next scene. And it
Mhm.
helps, especially when you have more limited time. I found it's helping me now. Okay, this is my plan for right now. So I'm not kind of wasting the time I do have at the computer. So it's been adjustment, but I feel like I'm getting into a new routine right now that works.
It's like March was the lost month, and now we just have the new normal. Now the
Right.
new normal is this is what we're going to do. Do you still use the whiteboard for laying everything out the way you
I
used to?
do. I do. There's a specific time when that kind of comes into play. But I do have like the whiteboard where I have like different colored sticky notes. And
Mhm.
I have it like laid out on the floor but I have to be a little bit further in sometimes to be able to kind of plan the big picture. But I do. I find it helpful.
So are we still going to see another book next summer? Are you still on
That is,
doing that one?
I fingers crossed. Fingers.
Great, 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 great.
I'm still working on it right now, though.
Yeah, but I think this has been just such a different time. And I think that also there's so much internal thinking going on that when you do sit down, it'll be like, wait, I can just sit down and do this. That'll be, something kind of wonderful to be able to
Yeah.
just do it for a
Yeah.
change. So you have this terrific remote tour lined up because you usually do this tour in like this, July, August timing. I think
Mhm.
it's usually when you're on the road.
Yeah.
And this time it's all virtual. And I find that that's going to be nice because you don't have to leave the house. You don't have to pack. You don't have to forget what you
Right.
forgot to pack.
Right.
And you can also, I like the fact that you're going to be able to connect with a lot of different people around the country that you might not be able to get to that state or whatever. So what are you thinking about this going out?
Yeah, that's sort of my hope too. On the one hand, I'll miss visiting bookstores and getting to see people in person, but I do hope that, we're not going to be bound by geography anymore. And so hopefully, we can all kind of connect in different events, and we're doing different types of venues. A lot of the bookstores I was hoping to visit are wonderful, and they've shifted to hosting virtually. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and the events I know are listed on your website, megamiranda.com, so people can go out there and take a look. And what's also interesting too, I think, is that you also don't have to worry about missing a plane. There's
Right.
a lot of stress, and there's a lot of stress and tension into doing a big tour, because if one thing goes wrong, everything for the next day could completely go awry. And here it's like, doing media, doing everything is, okay, I'm just going to do this at 9, do this at whatever. And I think that the stress of travel, I mean, there is room service, and we will miss room service. But besides room service, there's a lot of getting to and from that there's nothing sexy or fun about. And
Right.
instead, you can just sit there and concentrate on what you want to say and talk about with whatever group, instead of how am I going to get there and what am I going to wear and what am I going to do?
Yeah, not worrying about time constraints too, of, oh, I have to make sure that I am out at a certain time so I can get to the airport at a certain time. And yeah,
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to what the next few months brings. I'm
Yeah.
very, very excited.
I think there's a lot of very interesting moments that have come out of this.
Mhm.
And yes, I'm very sad about stores not being open the way that they were and things like that. But I feel that I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of authors like, okay, I would have hoped for you to come to New York. You
Right.
may not have come. We may not have been able to do this. And I do feel like those doors are being open a lot more,
Mhm.
because you can just sit there and say, oh, we're just going to put this together and be able to do it. And it's not quite constrained by having to be at a place at a specific time, because even doing a television thing, if you get stuck in a thunderstorm the night before, the following morning may not be happening, and it's a
Yeah.
lot of stress.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed in general too during this time was how, even different people I haven't seen in a long time, we've connected in different ways. And we were like, my family, we have like family game nights with my family in New Jersey with my kids. And I'm like, oh, we could have been doing this all
Right,
the time, and
right.
not just when I was visiting. And so it's actually been kind of nice to see how we can connect in different ways and kind of seeing what there is. Yeah.
Yeah, and being able to connect with the readers in a different kind of a situation, because if you're talking, but then there's a chat on the side where they could be asking questions, and somebody may be reluctant in a live event to raise their hand and ask a question, but to type a question is something completely different.
Mhm.
And they can also see what other people are lining up as the questions, which may spur them to do something as well. I think that this is a completely different experience for the author, but I also think it's very different for the readers and the audience as well.
I agree. I agree. And I think, not having the constraints of geography is wonderful too.
Yeah, because there are a lot of places you can't get to, and there are a
Right.
lot of places you don't want to be in the middle of the summer. And now
Mhm.
you don't have to worry about that, So I think it's going to be. I've decided that over these last couple of months, you just got to look at the bright side of everything, and you've
Right.
got to figure out what can you do and make it work. How can we make it work best for the stores, which we
Mhm.
want to make sure that continue to sell the books, whether it's be signed book plates or whatever's got to happen. What can we do to make it special for people?
Yeah.
So there's that. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm so jealous of everybody who still gets to read the book that I read way too quickly, way too quickly. And this Last House Guest is out in paperback. So anybody who wants to read 2 books, okay, I can assign 2 out for absolutely no problem. And I look forward to seeing what you do next. I'm hoping
Thank
to get a real early copy, so keep writing. And I thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun, especially since I had so many questions about the way you structure the book and where that character came from.
Oh, well, thank you. This has been wonderful. I love chatting with you. This was so fun.
So thanks so much. And to everybody, look forward to seeing you next time.